Buenas tardes, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. This is the series fourth. This is series fourth of this conversation, live conversations with experts on sustainability globally. And I'm very, very happy to have somebody very special, very knowledgeable and experienced on the sustainability field for over 2 decades. So let me just tell you that this was born as a project where I wanted to bring people, like I said, specialists and people experienced in sustainability, just to have or give an idea for businesses and people in the audience. It's a goal. It's a goal of this conversation of this program or this series of conversations to bring ideas and guests that will inspire and help you build more sustainable organizations and projects. So, if you're here, it's because you're interested in making this world a better place for your family, for your business, for your company, for all other stakeholders that you're involved with. So, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Chris Coulter, who is CEO of GlobeScan. So, Chris, welcome and thank you so much for accepting to be my guest.
Oh, thank you for having me, Itzel. I'm excited.
Yes, I'm excited too. It's an honor to have you as the opening guest of this series. And let me just introduce you guys to Chris. Chris works with leadership organizations around the world to help them better understand and respond to shifting stakeholder expectations, build trust in key constituencies, and exert greater influence in shaping the future. Chris has, like I said, over 2 decades of experience in providing evidence-based counsel in the areas of reputation, purpose, and sustainability. He is passionate about building trusted and recognized leadership for GlobeScan's clients, and he has substantive international experience. He has lived in North America, Europe, and Asia, and works with GlobeScan clients in all the regions of the world, like I mentioned. He is a member of Walgreens Corporate Responsibility Advisory Board, the Test of Corporate Purpose Advisory Board, and the multinational subcommittee of B Lab's Standards Advisory Council. He's also the chair of Canadian Business versus Social Responsibility and is the author of All In, the Future of Business Leadership, which is a book, which, by the way, I have right here, and I absolutely recommend to all of you. So, Chris, welcome and thank you so much. So just to get started and warm up a little bit the conversation, I would like you to share with us, how did you get involved with sustainability? How was GlobeScan born, and how has the company taken shape?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, Itzel, and let's warm up, yeah, because it's really cold up here in Toronto. So
Yes, by the way, yeah, Chris is based in Toronto.
Yeah, so I've been with GlobeScan for over 20 years, as you said. So I'm old, first of all, but I stumbled into this role and the company actually, and I. As I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor, and things kind of went a little bit funny. And I was very, as many young people were, preoccupied with the state of the world, and international development became a passion of mine. So I studied international development, and then I worked at CEDA, which is the Canadian International Development Agency. It's now defunct, but it was, in Ottawa, as a key development agency in the world. And there I was doing some work in the Africa division, and then I saw this little poster that said volunteer in Ukraine. And my mother's family is Ukrainian, and so then, it'd be great to do. And so I ended up being posted with a company or a NGO in Ukraine doing public opinion polling on things that are very germane to today. NATO affiliation, Russian tensions, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I was exposed to that, and I came back to Toronto, and then I found this small company doing public opinion research on environmental attitudes around the world. And so that connected all the dots, and that's how I was sort of got focused on this. And our founder of GlobeScan, Doug Miller, was very keenly focused on trying to understand and move people along in the sustainable development journey. And we have been sort of picking up that mantle ever since and trying to drive forward um, a better understanding of what is the context within which all organizations operate around sustainable development, and what are the priorities and how are the expectations shifting for all different stakeholders across that, and what does it mean for leadership organizations to really make more progress at pace and scale. And that's what we've been kind of growing ever since at GlobeScan.
Wonderful. How interesting. So you had this vision, or let's say global vision of having, uh, well, issues causing impact in different parts of the world and maybe all at once sometimes. So how have you experienced, or how have you seen, what are the changes, the evolution of sustainability across or along throughout this time that you've been working on this field in the business world? What's the changes that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think what we don't appreciate enough in the sustainable development, you know, discipline or movement or community, is just the history of sustainability. So this is one of those
Mhm.
that is interesting and important for us to look at. It's not that old. I mean, if we look at the 1972 conference in Helsinki, that probably is, 50 years ago is when the very first formal global governance or conversations at some level of rigor took place. And then when Madam Brundtland and the Brundtland Commission launched Our Common Future in 1987, which is when
Mhm.
GlobeScan was founded, actually that I think became another important milestone in it. So we've really been in this game for, collectively, as many stakeholders across the world, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years, but it's quite niche. So it's not a lot of time, given what the discipline is trying to do of transform society and the economy in ways that allow for a thriving population and a thriving planet. On the business side, and I think the early years of sustainable development were very preoccupied with governmental perspectives. The Rio Earth Summit in 1992 was a very governmental conference, and where governments were leading the charge and civil society was participating, but business was pretty quiet and muted in those conversations. And it
Mhm.
only took until the late 90s, when there was a green wave in certain parts of the world and in the West largely, where all of a sudden companies were feeling more pressure from NGOs and activists. The science around climate change was beginning to percolate. Regulations were beginning to be discussed at capitals around the world. And then consumers were also beginning to question and understand what were companies doing in this space.
Mhm.
That was, up until then, it was pretty limited. But then we do have this amazing data from a survey we have, the GlobeScan Sustainability Survey, which has been tracking sustainable development expert views for over 25 years. And so we began asking a question to this panel of experts, global panel, experts from business, civil society, academia, and governments, their views of leadership companies. So when that book you showed, the All In, that I wrote with David Grayson and Mark Lee, the three of us looked at that data set of 25 years of experts pointing to different companies as leaders, and we identified three distinct eras of leadership that I think are that sort of describe the flow of the evolution of the agenda. So
Mhm.
back in the 90s, when the music was a bit better and life was a bit simpler, we had experts pointing to companies like BP and Shell and 3M and DuPont and Dow Chemical. So there was this sense of these big industrial companies that had very material impacts on society and on the planet were viewed, ironically, as the leading companies, according to these experts who were deep into sustainable development. And the reason why they were appointed that way as leaders is because these were the first companies to truly explore their material impacts and begin to have strategies to reduce them down. So we
Mhm.
looked at that era as the do no harm era, where the best idea we collectively had was for companies to reduce their impacts, their negative impacts on society and the planet. So that was that era. But then around a decade later, this expert panel began pointing to a different set of companies, companies like Nike and GE and Walmart and Marks and Spencer. And what transpired, I think, in that between those two eras of the do no harm era and then this what we called the strategic integration era, where companies moved from a risk management perspective of seeing sustainability just in the lens of risk to the opportunity side to create more value. And more value by retaining and attracting employees, or more value by having better partnerships with NGOs or governments, or more value by influencing public policy, or building brand equity with their customers and consumers, and also to a degree with investors. And to do that, they needed to take the sustainability function or the community affairs function even and get it into the enterprise, get it into HR, into strategy, into brand, into R&D and innovation, and all those different elements. And to do that, they needed, this is all around adapting to the circumstances. They wanted to create these strategies that stretched into the full company. So companies like GE in 2004 launched Eco-Imagination, from that perspective, the first truly global sustainability strategy for a big Fortune 500 company. Not perfect, but big enough. That was important. And Jeff Immelt told us after the fact that he looked at what Ford was doing and what BP and Shell and DuPont were doing and built on the back of this strategy. And then Walmart came along in 2005 and did their Sustainability 360 strategy. And then in 2007, Marks and Spencer built upon these things to create the gorilla of all sustainability strategies at the time, Plan A, which had over 100 metrics and very detailed understanding of the business operations and the impacts. And then on top of that, we had Unilever in 2010 launch their Sustainable Living Plan, which became the iconic sustainability strategy, both for its ambition and comprehensiveness. But you can see this era being very strategy focused in building it. And then a little bit later, we think around 2016 or so, maybe 2015, there was another batch of companies that experts were pointing to. So Danone and IKEA and Natura out of Brazil and Patagonia became recognized along with Unilever as leading companies. And what was interesting in that moment was it wasn't just the do no harm and reduce risks. It wasn't just building a strategy. It was also taking all of that and becoming more accessible and catalytic and engaging with all of their stakeholders. So if you've got a company with 100,000 employees, how do you motivate and mobilize them? Well, you can't have them all read a detailed sustainability report. You need to find simple ways of doing that. And that's what purpose and being purposeful is about. And the same with external stakeholders, which could be billions of consumers in the case of Unilever or P&G or Nestle, or it could be tens of thousands of customers in other sort of companies. But how do you mobilize them? And that was very much the values and purpose. And I think now we're just coming into more deeply the fourth wave of sustainability leadership, which we're calling the regenerative era, where we're looking at a net positive approach to try and catch up in many ways on some of the challenges we've had historically and the deficits we've built environmentally, socially, and economically. And that requires companies to be fully circular, to see net positive impacts environmentally and socially, and find ways to regenerate all different elements of value. And this is a more comprehensive, wonky, complex, sophisticated approach to business and sustainability. But the moment feels right again for us to get into that next level, given the more even clearer acute challenges on climate or nature or social inequality.
That's wonderful to hear, like how you've experienced. And well, I have also made this sort of like walk through the evolution of sustainability to whenever possible and whenever appropriate to talk about this with my clients and with my students, because as you know, I am a university professor, but I also develop or design courses for corporations and work in alliance with some groups that work with their clients on sustainability, right? And so this is like when we see in retrospect, when we see backwards, it's been almost 100 years since the very early conversations of sustainability. And for us to be talking about net positive, like the latest book of Paul Polman from Unilever, ex-CEO of Unilever, is, I think, for me at least, is very positive, very optimistic. And by the way, I'll have my next guest will be Bill Reed, an expert on regeneration. So we're definitely, or I see this trend of moving definitely towards regeneration, although very slowly. It seems like the big momentum of corporate sustainability or corporate social responsibility, and more so now the ESG movement has taken so much space and so much interest and even investment. But do you think we're like still so are we still far from reaching this regeneration and net positive conversation within the business realm?
Yes, I think we are, and I think that the danger is to look at the leading companies that we've talked about already, and assume that other companies are doing that. And I think that's the challenge: is that the leadership evolution that we were just speaking to is with among, is it 100? Is it 200? Is it maybe 300 companies that are taking some level of sophistication and commitment and ambition to really integrate it into their business model? It's still a very limited, small part of the pyramid, right? The top of the pyramid are these companies, and it's wonderful, and they've got long value chains, and they're able to exert some influence and demonstrate what leadership looks like. That's fantastic. But we have, I think, by last estimates, over 85,000 multinational companies on the planet, and millions of smaller, more domestic companies. And we know we've got just a very few of that massive amount of businesses on the planet that have, understood sustainability fully and have begun to address it and integrate it and make progress around it. So at the same time, we have this clock ticking that tells us we don't have a lot of time to deal with the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis, or really the social economic crisis of this inequality. And we know how COVID has magnified all these things through that. So we have a huge movement on the ESG revolution that's transpiring, and we should be encouraged by it and excited by it, because it brings the finance industry into it, and it brings thousands of new companies that are forced into it fundamentally because of compliance and disclosure regulations, and because their investors are asking questions. And that's fantastic. But we shouldn't fool ourselves that is sufficient.
Right.
Necessary, but not sufficient. And I do worry that the ESG conversation becomes one of compliance and becomes one of self-satisfaction, rather than really pushing ourselves to find those regenerative business models, because we've got a lot of catching up to do, an extraordinary amount of work to be done to address some of these crises, which are existential in nature. And, global companies can't be successful in a failed world. And so there's self-interests that are there, but it's hard for us to coordinate this and to move quick enough in some cases.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that comment, because I also believe that ESG has become so, just like, I believe it's like the second step, or the following step after looking at getting a certification for a company, and like a CSR certification, or a certain seal or stamp or distinction award, as becoming a greener company, a more sustainable company. And I say quote unquote, because sometimes it seems like it's just a matter of marketing, and they end up falling into greenwashing. And so there's like this risk of ESG falling into the same, just a new kind of trend or wave. So, and actually, we had a comment here from Mauricio Mira from Colombia. He says, "Is ESG the right approach?" So I think you already answered that in a way. He says, "I see many gaps on their implementation." And sorry to jump into the questions before we finish the conversation, but I thought it was
Oh,
appropriate.
yeah. And I think, Mauricio, it's a great question. And I do think, ESG is important. We shouldn't discount it. And it really has transformed the legitimacy and the mainstreaming of business.
Yeah.
But as the window, I mean, the Overton window is a concept of as norms change, the window moves a little bit. And now we see
Mhm.
this becomes much more acceptable and mainstream.
Right.
I think our job and the necessity of the urgency of the issues means that the leaders at the pyramid have to keep pushing further, which I think is the regenerative approach.
Hmm.
And many stakeholders, especially in civil society, are skeptical of all of this, right? And when
Hmm.
good reason in some cases. And the danger, of course, of having so many trillions of dollars in assets under management with an ESG lens. I mean, it's
Hmm.
important. The numbers are extraordinary. It's is it 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 dollars under assets under management or with an ESG lens? And yet the world hasn't changed, right? We're still dealing with the same challenges of too much carbon in the atmosphere, too much extinction, too much nature loss, too much inequality and poverty and
Hmm.
gaps there. So either there's a lag in the system and it's going to explode and change very dramatically, or the ESG lens isn't sufficient, right? We just need to raise the bar on these things so we really truly understand impact investing differently from what the current status quo of ESG investing is.
Right. Right. Great. Well, thank you so much for that. And I was going to say something, and I spaced out on my comment,
Okay.
but I'll go back to it. Oh yeah, yeah, I got it. So I think one of the positive things about ESG is that is giving some kind of structure
Mhm.
for companies and incorporating the financial aspect that so many corporations or business leaders are so concerned about, but also because they have to um, get back to their shareholders. They have to go back and give them uh, results, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a positive thing, but we should look beyond ESG and beyond net zero, like you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, and I think, and it's a super positive thing because I always think of this ecosystem that's driving change, right?
Mhm.
We've got business on one side and all these other stakeholders that are putting pressure or giving rewards or facilitating change in business. And all of the different pieces of the puzzle were there, but investors were a missing piece. And once investors clicked on and see,
Mhm.
because of science, giving them the metrics and understanding of what was transpiring, the risk challenges, the proof
Mhm.
that companies that manage sustainability outperform the marketplace, all of that data switch them on. And
Mhm.
now we have all these different stakeholders, governments and civil society and consumers and customers and employees, for the first time, I think, in the 40 or 50 years we've been talking about, where it's all working together as a watch, all the different
Mhm.
gears for the first time working in the same direction, not always perfectly, not at the same
Mhm.
speed, different times, different places is different. But before we had, sand in the gears, so they weren't moving together, and
Mhm.
investors were one of those blocks. But now that they're working, I think we're in this network effect where it's going to be a flywheel of ever more um, expectations and pressures and opportunities and rewards for business. So it is this moment of liftoff that we're at, which
Mhm.
is exciting. And again, which means that we need to push and differentiate true leadership and how that leadership will be different in 2 years than it is today.
Mhm.
Because that was what was so fascinating in our review of the history of corporate leadership, is that how quickly it has evolved. And if we're
Right.
in this for a while, you don't see it, but when you step back and look at it, it's quite dramatic, and it tells us that it's going to keep evolving and changing. So companies who have ambitions to be leaders need to be tight with that and push their organizations and look for the next thing to
Mhm.
grab onto the value of it, and also be much more future fit as a business as a result.
Do you think, what do you think? This is a probably very ambitious question. And what do you think will take us to make it? What do we need to actually achieve sustainability? Or I guess we don't know yet what sustainability is, right? But we have an idea of what it could look like. But what would it take for us to achieve 1.5 degrees in time?
Well, I think we had lots of good hints coming out of COP26 in Glasgow, and we have, it wasn't perfect. The glass is either half full or half empty based on how you assess it, but there's no question that we had some good movement around things that connected the nature agenda to climate change, the deforestation agreement that was
Mm-hmm.
quite wide-ranging and ambitious. We did have the financial piece of the puzzle now firmly put in, and Mark Carney did, brilliant work with the GFANS club, so the financial capital is there to fund and invest in the transition. $130 trillion conception
Mm-hmm.
is available, so there's no excuse that we have the money. I think the other pieces of the puzzle relate to, I think, bringing it down to action, of course, in the short term. And there's the net zero transitions that many companies are focusing on. And we're seeing an explosion of commitments and aspirations around it, and also some healthy skepticism and pushback and demanding more details and sharper plans and clearer progress on that. So that's all good. I do think one of the missing pieces of the puzzle is the 8 billion of us who are, citizens and consumers and employees and investors and all these different other hats that we wear. And that's the piece that has been the most challenging and the most difficult, because it's hard for all of us to understand and focus and move at once. And the pace of change that's required to try and live up to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, let alone the 1.5 degrees by the end of the century, it requires a huge amount of change, and
Mm-hmm.
it requires very, very little slippage. We can't have
Yeah.
public policy not keep up. So the political will piece of the puzzle is fundamental. We know that you only have sustained public policy that's going to work if the population is engaged and committed to it. So we're
Right.
going through a very disruptive challenge right now with polarization and negative populism that's manifesting, very much related to, I think, people who feel left out or left behind, or their interests are threatened. And so this idea of a just transition, not just a transition for a low carbon economy, but a just one that brings everyone along, people who are working in industries that'll be affected and impacted. How do we, responsibly and fairly bring them along? How do we make sure that vulnerable populations that are most affected by climate change are also protected, and their adaptation capacity is increased through investments? And even as far as we know that the nature-based solutions are fundamental to many net zero transition plans and climate change. And the way we implement those nature-based solutions is very dependent upon indigenous people across the world who are stewards of so much of the biodiversity on the planet. And yet they could be the most vulnerable populations, the least empowered, the very little rights and always contested around um, the legitimacy. And so if they aren't protected and supported, then all the nature-based solutions are also not protected and supported, and all the net zero plans go to waste, and we don't hit the one point. So I think we're at this phase of really embracing the complexity, understanding it, and knowing we have to bring everyone along. And that's the challenge. The good news is that we have two massive, big, simple issues on the sustainability agenda: climate change and inequality. And they both
Mm-hmm.
need in the just transition. And if we can get our heads around it, then we're there. And the money is there. There's no problem. The billionaire club in the world, billionaires made $5 trillion additional dollars in 2021. So
Mm-hmm.
$5 trillion of more wealth went to the billionaires. The cash is there. It's the inequality and the injustice that will slow us down if we're not being very careful.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we've seen it for not only this last year, but for the few last couple of years that the investment has been shifting towards the more strategic uh, implementation of sustainability throughout businesses, like BlackRock. Uh, well, there's a lot of different groups, not only BlackRock, that have definitely made clear that that's a priority for businesses within that group. Um, so, do you think the consumers? How are consumers responding worldwide? I know GlobeScan does this several surveys, and actually, full disclosure, I have. I am honored to be in partnership with GlobeScan. And full disclosure, this is not sponsored by GlobeScan. This is a series of talks that I started a couple of years ago. But I know because I've worked with GlobeScan on this, and for many years I was also responding to surveys that you sent out to the experts on sustainability. So I've known GlobeScan for at least 15 years. I know that you have dialed in many, not every, but many of the global trends on consumers because it's so detailed. It would be basically impossible to know them. But GlobeScan does a really, really wonderful job. What are these trends of consumers looking at having a better, actually more sustainable lifestyles?
Yeah, well, and yeah, and so you're a remarkable, fantastic partner in Mexico, and you did all this great work as well last year on healthy and sustainable living, putting Mexico in context of other countries around the world. So you know this well too. But I
Yes.
think this research we've been doing research with consumers for over 20 years, trying to understand the sustainability journey and how to mobilize, engage, and see how they will respond to different opportunities, both as citizens and as consumers. And
Mm-hmm.
we see this ongoing tension and say-do gap and aspiration action gap that exists. But what has changed is a heightened interest and concern level
Mm-hmm.
around all issues related to sustainability. Even through COVID, that consumers are increasingly concerned about climate change and poverty issues and biodiversity issues and water and diversity issues. So all those things are moving even through this real health crisis that we're experiencing. So that's important that people are more deeply concerned and engaged. We also know at a personal level, the personal impacts of things like climate change are also increasing significantly across almost all the 30 countries we're tracking. So we know at an esoteric level, you can stand back and say, oh yeah, climate change or poverty is a big deal. But once it affects you and your family,
Right.
usually there's a behavioral connection and an impact that changes things. I think we're at that moment where there's an opportunity to do so.
It
So those
becomes personal.
very personal, and then when we know when it's close to us and personal, we can begin to understand a bit more and respond differently. And there's an opportunity for brands to
Right.
then move and mobilize people when they're there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, we still have lots of inconsistency as we as consumers behave, and part of it is there's lack of clarity of what good looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the in the sustainability agenda, we think that this has been going on for a long time. For the average person, it's very difficult for them to discern the
Right.
difference between a certain product or two different kinds of products. And I always think of the very simple example of a can of soup, and you're in the grocery store and you pick up two cans of soup, and it's both tomato soup, and which brand has the better sustainability kind of value proposition to you as a consumer? It's really difficult. We have like 3 or 4 seconds to make the choice, and it's not obvious. And so the lack of obviousness of real difference and differentiation
Mm-hmm.
is an obstacle to consumers shopping more with their values, which is what they want to do. There's a conflict in all of us. We have values as citizens, what we
Right.
believe in, what we're concerned about, what we care about. And then when we go to shop and buy something, there's a different set of muscles that kick in. And so we need to try and connect them together. The good news is that we're early in the process, so we have
Right.
lots of work to do to get to engage people. And there's a
Mhm.
study done by the Stern School in New York at the Center for Sustainable Business called the Sustainable Market Share Index, and it's a brilliant study where they look at 70,000 products across the U.S. that represent,
Mhm.
30% of consumer spend on consumer goods. So it's
Mhm.
the whole wide range of things. And in looking at those 70,000 products, they found only 17% of those products have some sort of sustainability message. So
Very,
just
very small.
83% have no visibility of sustainability. And that 17% could be exaggerated, could be inauthentic, could be greenwashing, or it could be quite accurate. But yet, it just tells us that the majority of stuff that we buy, for the average consumer, it's not obvious what the sustainability value or differentiation or opportunity is for a consumer. So we haven't done a great job in really engaging and selling sustainability to consumers. So we need to lock that in better and more clearly, and that'll catapult consumer behavior, I think, going forward.
Right. So businesses, you listened. This is a great opportunity for you to improve on this. The information, how, and I think you touched a really important point, Chris, which is how consumers define sustainability. What is good? What is healthy? What is in regards to food? What is organic? What is eco-friendly, etc. And I think the survey or the surveys that GlobeScan carries out globally do a remarkable job of like cleaning these different concepts and making a more homogeneous definition of what that means for the consumer and how are they seeing this as a barrier or whether there's enough information, the availability of the products, etc. I think GlobeScan does this remarkably for your clients, for its clients. And I recommend everybody to go to the globescan.com website and you can find all the reports in various different topics. The highlights reports are available to you guys, the webinars as well. They constantly do webinars on the different topics that they survey. And for businesses, obviously, if you want to get more detailed information, get in touch with GlobeScan directly. But I think this is really important because even for some languages, like the Spanish language, we have two different words for sustainability. So we have the sustentabilidad, which is an Anglicism, and we have sostenibilidad. So even that becomes kind of like a problem defining sustainability, or not a problem, but a challenge.
Yeah.
So this is quite interesting. And jumping a little bit to a different topic, I wanted you to mention a little bit about the sustainability handbook, which you released last week. So can you speak a little bit about it? What it
Sure.
is, for whom it is?
Yeah, so this is it's called the Sustainable Business Handbook,
The
and
Sustainable Business Handbook. Yes, sorry.
yeah, the SBH, the Sustainable Business Handbook. So the same two authors that I wrote All In with a couple of years ago, David Grayson, who's a professor at the Cranfield School of Management in the UK, and Mark Lee, who's the executive director of the Sustainability Institute by ERM, and he's based in California.
Mm-hmm.
We were approached by a Kogan Pager publisher to write this handbook, a practical manual of how all these companies that are beginning to engage on sustainability because of the ESG pull, but also because of just the natural evolution of the agenda. And also because many companies in supply chains, as a supplier to a company that is a leading company, and it can be whatever sector we're talking about, where the pressures are now and the expectations of your big customer, it's Walmart or it's Unilever or it's Pfizer or McDonald's, that you have an expectation as a supplier to meet their standards on sustainability. There's a real demand for companies to begin to move quickly and build their sustainability strategies. So we wanted to make a very practical handbook. And so we have 13 chapters of how do you begin from purpose to do your materiality, to developing a strategy, to training, to reporting, to communications and marketing too. And we did it in a way that we thought was very accessible and simple of like, what are we talking about? What is materiality, for example? Why is it important? Why is it valuable? How do you do it? What are the key
Mhm.
step by step of how do you build it together? And then we have 26 case studies to try and bring it to life. And we purposely chose case studies where in each chapter, one case study of a company that's quite sophisticated and have been doing that piece of sustainability very well, and then a company that's sort of new into it and how they've approached it to try and give a flavor for readers, no matter where they are in the continuum of how they can see themselves in that process and in that book. So
Mhm.
our hope is that this becomes part of the ability to drive more sustainable business more quickly across the world, and that it is a shortcut, and we hope a thoughtful, considered shortcut to try and drive that movement more quickly.
Wonderful. Sounds super interesting. I can't wait to get a copy. Where can we get a copy?
You can get it at Amazon. It's on Amazon.com, or
Mhm.
Kogan Page is the publisher. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it'll be on a few other typical places where you buy your books online.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll make sure to add a link to our streaming so people can look for it or can find it. And so wrapping up, I have so many more questions I would like to ask you, but I know your time is precious. Our time is precious on this earth,
Everyone's time is
but
precious.
you are a very busy man. So thank you so much for making the time for being here. And one last question before we jump into several comments and questions we have here from the audience. By the way, thank you so much for those connecting. We have a very international audience. We have people from Nigeria, Colombia, Sweden, the US, Canada, the UK, I believe, Mexico, and I can't see everybody else's location, but we have a pretty international audience. So
That's
thanks for being here and sending your questions. So, Chris, what do you think is necessary in order to achieve more decisive leadership towards sustainability?
Well, Paul Pullman and Andrew Winston's book Net Positive you referenced. I mean, they are very much focused on courageous companies, right, and the courage required to be a leader. So I think it's partly that. I think it's there's a courage element of leaders in companies just seeing the moral imperative and also the
Mhm.
opportunity at the same time. I think that's critical. I do think we have anytime we can slow down and get out of the short-termism that we're all preoccupied with, especially publicly traded companies are
Mhm.
exposed to. If we step back and say, what does tomorrow look like? What does 10 years from now look like demographically? What are the new consumers going to be expecting and wanting? Where are the natural resources or the resources that fit into our products and services? Where are they coming from? How are things like megatrends like climate change and scarcity and inequality going to affect and shape the world? All of those things, and where the new markets, in the global south. And when you look at those and step back, then the obviousness of sustainable business becomes unavoidable. You just see it; it's clear. And if we can find ways to stretch our thinking and make decisions based on longer term planning, it clicks in. The
Mhm.
difficulty is when we're needing to shift our business model to a circular business model in the next quarter, at the same time of keeping up the pressures we have for sales and from investors and things like that. And that's our governance challenge, that we've got to find that, which requires
Mhm.
thoughtfulness and courage, but also really good leadership. I think we also need good regulations, and we need better public policy and clearer um, choice editing that transpires at a regulatory environment. So we just get rid of different approaches and different ways of building or manufacturing or products that are sold. That's important, and we need to move quickly that way. And governments need to find ways to have the courage as well to impose some of those restrictions in some cases, and also create incentives for other positive behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that last comment. And also, I guess adding to that, I would say that also personal sustainability is key. I believe that's where it starts, so that you can make that impact throughout your different circles, social, professional, etc. And I think you actually mentioned part of this, at least that's my interpretation. I call it personal sustainability. You call it individual leadership in your all in book. And I think it starts from there. And this is something that I try to promote like widely, because I think that's where it all starts and where it will all click, I think.
Absolutely, and it'll be enduring too. When it does
Mhm.
happen at a personal level and a transformative level, then there's an enduringness to it, which keeps it going even through good and bad times.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I keep telling my students and my clients to find this sweet spot where you can come back to, or you can recenter or regroup where things go south. It's very, very important. Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. And let me just run through the comments and questions. I think you can also see them on your screen, but I'll read them to you. Rose Goodbread says, "Do you think there is valuation in certifications for corporations such as B Corp, so consumers are able to make sustainable choices?"
It's a great question, and a little bit of a controversial question, because there's been some people over the years saying, "Oh, certifications, they're too confusing. There's too many of them for consumers."
Hmm.
Our work, we do work with MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council certification, and FSC, the Forward Stewardship Council
Hmm.
certification, and also Fair Trade. And all of them, when consumers know and understand and trust the label, it has a very powerful impact for consumers. It makes their decision that much easier and showcases again that differentiation, that clarity between those two cans of soup. It becomes an
Hmm.
easier thing to achieve. So it's a shortcut. It's a great heuristic. So certifications, when they're strong and they retain the trust, which means that they have to be rigorous and real and substantive,
Hmm.
they're wonderful. On B Corp, I mean, I was on a call with some of the B Corp folks today, and I think they are such a critical part of the ecosystem, and
Hmm.
that pyramid that we're talking about, where we need to keep growing and stretching the top of what good looks like, and the B Corp movement pushes all businesses towards that. And I think they are increasingly seeing their role as being that ability to showcase some of the very best in business, and their rigor around certifications are really important. And I think that it does trickle down to consumers, but especially employees in the B Corp perspective. And we became a certified B Corp, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, and it really mattered to our employees. It was a very big, important um, step of consistency in us believing what we're trying to do, and it's an important piece of the puzzle.
That's wonderful, and congratulations. I do think that it does make a difference when companies become B certified or B Corp certified. It for those, especially for those employees that are concerned with these issues on sustainability or social impact, it does make a difference. So yeah, wonderful, and congratulations. Let me go through. It's more like a comment from Isibor Aikbe from Nigeria.
Mm.
Cutting cost and adoption of renewable energy should be embraced as CSR for many private um, and government agencies. Sorry, let me reread it. Cutting cost and adoption of renewable energy should be embraced as CSR for private and government agencies. Many organizations tend to neglect this fact.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think it's a great comment, and I do think one of the ways companies need to find momentum on adopting sustainability inside is to show some wins, and one of those wins is to reduce your costs and doing things better and more efficiently and differently. And that is one way definitely to build credentials for sustainability in a company. So we need to find different ways. Renewable energy is one of those great cases where if companies that adopted renewable energy transitions early, they avoided the disruption of lots of fossil fuel and the price spikes that have transpired over the last 5 or 6 years. It's up and down constantly, but it's a cheaper way and a more consistent way to maintain energy inputs and reliability of cost structure. So that's a critical piece of the puzzle.
Great. Well, thank you. And there's several comments with somebody here. I can't see their name. A LinkedIn people, a LinkedIn person connecting from LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Chris. The conversation is insightful and informative. Well done. So wait, I think I have a new comment. Yeah, Rose said, thank you for your input. So I think if you guys don't have a last question, I would like to wrap this up. And thank you so much again, Chris, for being my opening guest of this 4th series of the conversations, Leadership for Sustainability, Liderazgo para la Sostenibilidad in Spanish. You can find the rest of this is the 20th conversation, but the previous ones are in my YouTube channel. It will be easier to find them there under the playlist for Liderazgo para la Sostenibilidad. I'll add that in English as well, so it's easier for English speakers to find it. And don't leave the broadcast in the studio. I'll see you in a few minutes just to thank you personally, privately. And thank you so much for connecting. Be on the lookout for the next guests, which are amazing also. Experts, global experts on sustainability. The next one is Bill Reed, expert on regeneration, somebody I respect and I've known for many, many years. And later on, we have circular economy experts and some senior sustainability coaches. So wait for them. There will be very, very interesting as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Itzel. Thank you so much. And good night to people who are staying up late in Nigeria and Sweden and the UK.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Take
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Gracias.